Way to John chapter 18. John chapter 18, and I am going to plow through a bunch of verses today. A lot of this is narrative descriptions of Jesus' arrest and his so-called trials, and so, again, a lot of it is narrative descriptions. I will be sharing a few points with you, maybe to help understand some of what was going on. But all in all, I decided to cover a bunch of material here, and certainly didn't. I'm not going to get in depth as I have with some of the other sections, but a lot of this is just a description of what happened that night Jesus was arrested and went through and appeared before a number of different people in these trials. And so with that, let's get started here. Chapter 18, verses 1 and 2. John 18, verses 1 and 2. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. And on the other side there was an olive grove, and he and his disciples went into it. And now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. And so Jesus and the 11, his 11 closest followers, left, either from, if you remember from before, some believe that they were still, up until the beginning of chapter 18, still in the upper room. Other people believe they had left the upper room and Jesus was talking to them as they walked, and also maybe sat down at a couple places along the way and talked to them. We're not sure. In any case, by the time chapter 18 starts, they're heading for the lower slope of the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and for an olive grove called Gethsemane, which Gethsemane means oil press. And that was a place on the mountain where Jesus often met with his disciples. And from my understanding, sometimes they might have even ended up sleeping up there. Judas, possibly after going to the upper room to try to find where Jesus, and leading this detachment of soldiers and officials and so forth. Possibly Judas went first to the upper room, found that they had left there, and then headed for Gethsemane, or maybe he knew right off the bat that that's where Jesus was going to end up taking them. Again, we can't be exactly sure. But in any case, Judas led these soldiers and officials to Gethsemane to find Jesus there. Verse 3. So Judas came to the grove, that's the olive grove, Gethsemane, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. And they were carrying torches and lanterns and weapons. So Luke used, back in chapter 22 of Luke used the phrase officers of the temple guard. Whereas here John talks about soldiers. Officers of the temple guard would refer to the temple police rather than Roman soldiers. It's not impossible that both were there, possibly. It maybe even is likely that the Sanhedrin got permission to have a detachment of Roman soldiers go along with them, since if you remember back from John chapter 7, the Sanhedrin sent out the temple police to arrest Jesus, and what happened? Did they arrest him? No, they came back empty-handed, and of course, a lot of the Jewish religious leaders weren't happy about it. So it very well might have been that the Sanhedrin got a detachment of Roman soldiers, got permission to have a detachment of Roman soldiers go along with them. Matthew and Mark kind of seem to refer to this armed mob as, or as this group, but more as an armed mob than an organized group of soldiers. Like an organized military unit. So, it could have been the temple police along with kind of an armed mob. Sort of maybe guys that were deputized. We just really can't be sure who all was included in this. The torches and the lanterns were needed, of course, as the arrest took place when? At nighttime. And of course they were going up the slope of a mountain to this olive grove, and looking for Jesus in the darkness of that olive grove. Verses 4 through 6. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. I am he, Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. So, once again, Jesus knew his time had what? Which means what? He knew that it was what? Time for what? For him to go to the cross and die. And so he got up from where he was sitting there with the 11. He walked away from them a bit. He heard and probably saw the lights coming, this group coming toward them, and asked them who they were looking for. And of course they answered, what? Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus replied, I am he. And mysteriously, it's a very simple description here. It's the only place in the Gospels it's mentioned that when Jesus said, I am he, it says that this band of armed men who, many of them came to arrest him, they all drew back and what? Even fell down on the ground. Now, as I have found very, very often in the Gospel of John, different opinions about this falling back and falling down onto the ground thing. And I'm not going to go into all the opinions. I will simply tell you that I and others believe that this was something supernatural that happened. That God, through His Holy Spirit, when Jesus said, I am he, knocked them down, knocked them backwards and knocked them down. I can't reconcile any other reason that this band of armed men, many of them, had them far outnumbered. There was no reason for them to fall backwards and fall down on the ground. Even if Jesus surprised them or something, again, they're not all going to fall down on the ground. I think it was something supernatural that happened. Verses 7 through 9. Again, Jesus asked them, who is it that you want? And they said again, Jesus of Nazareth. Verse 8, I told you that I am he, Jesus answered. If you are looking for me, then let these men go. This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of those you gave me. So apparently these guys, after they had fallen down to the ground, they got right back up pretty quickly. I assume that they probably would have been pretty shook up. But Jesus asked them again who they're looking for. They said again, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus essentially said, look, I told you I'm who you're looking for, but let these guys go. What guys? The 11, these 11 closest followers. And Jesus' intent was to protect them, not have them taken custody in fulfillment of what he had said, that he had lost none that the Father had given him. Verses 10 and 11. Well, then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. And that servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? So realizing that Jesus is in danger here, Peter was courageous enough to take some kind of action, risk his own safety, come to Jesus' defense. I want to tell you something. I have never heard, I should change that. I don't remember ever hearing anybody teach or preach about the fact that it seems obvious Peter attacked Malchus with intent to kill. I mean, he went at him with a sword and ended up cutting off his right ear, which, if Malchus was facing him, means Peter was left-handed, by the way. But there's many other scenarios. Obviously, Peter either missed badly, or Malchus deflected the blow a little bit so that it just scraped down across the side of his head and took his ear off. Or it's possible even that he saw it coming and turned away, and that would be the way that if Peter was right-handed, that he could have actually taken off his right ear. Yeah, believe it or not, I thought through all this stuff. But in any case, again, I don't remember anybody ever teaching about the fact that Peter tried to kill him in defense of Jesus, but he ended up only taking his ear off, his right ear off. Jesus clearly, rebuked Peter about this. But why did he rebuke him? I think, he rebuked him because Jesus said what? What did Jesus say when he rebuked Peter for doing that? he says, shall I not drink this cup that the Father has given me? The reason Jesus rebuked him was that he was saying, I need to go and die. This all has to happen. It's time. My time has come. But what does that show, again, about Peter and likely all the others at this point, is that what? They still didn't what? They still didn't get it, that he was willingly going to his death, that in fact he had to die, he had to go to his death to pay the price for sins, that the time had come for him to go. And so, he really didn't yell at Peter about defending him or anything, about taking that action itself, but he yelled at him like, look, put the sword away. I got to go. I have to be arrested. I have to go die. But the guys just still weren't understanding that. Only Luke mentions that Jesus healed Malchus's ear, by the way. And then, if you're wondering, this reason that Jesus rebuked Peter, that there's this, shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? What does that mean to drink the cup? Well, the reality is that both the Old Testament and the New Testament use this symbolism of drinking a cup of bitter liquid to symbolize the wrath of God, the judgment of God, and so forth. And so, in both the Old and the New Testaments, it's used to that expression about drinking this cup, or I have to drink this bitter cup. It's used to refer to that. And so, this wrath or judgment of God. And so, Jesus is saying to Peter, shall I not go through with this process of experiencing the wrath of God to as has been prophesied, and which is necessary in order for the price for sin to be paid. But again, I'm convinced that Peter and the guys didn't understand anything about that. Of course, again, those of us who have true saving faith in Jesus will not have to drink that bitter cup. You understand? We don't have to experience the wrath of God. What's that fancy theological word that talks about the wrath of God being appeased? Yeah, propitiation. That's the appeasement of the wrath of God. And so Jesus took that. He appeased the wrath of God for those of us who have accepted Him in true saving faith. But for everybody else, they have to drink that bitter cup. They have to taste and drink the wrath of God, which one day ultimately will result in their condemnation to the lake of fire for the rest of all eternity. Verses 12 through 14. Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it would be good if one man died for the people. That was back earlier in the Gospel of John, if you remember when Caiaphas had said that. Well, when it says here about the commander, most likely the officer in charge, possibly from a Roman garrison in Jerusalem, this commander that's mentioned here in verse 12. The Greek word that's translated commander is actually a little bit of a, usually used kind of as a technical term for a military commander. And so that kind of strengthens the view that there were at least Roman soldiers involved and that they had a course of a commander, and that they were there in support of the Jewish religious leaders. But Jesus was taken at once to the residence of Annas. Annas had previously served as a high priest, like around 15 years before this. Annas had served a time as high priest, but the Romans kept forcing the Jews to rotate different high priests in, because pretty much they always had to have their finger. They didn't want any one high priest getting too powerful or anything. Caiaphas, who was Annas' son-in-law, he was the high priest throughout the time of Jesus' ministry and through his death and so forth. John's gospel is actually the only one that mentions Jesus appearing before Annas. This hearing before Annas was probably like a preliminary interrogation to evaluate the case kind of unofficially, since Caiaphas wasn't recognized by the Roman government, and sort of get Annas' opinion about it, because again, they couldn't use Annas' testimony or anything Annas said before the Romans because they didn't recognize him, but they kind of wanted to get his opinion, is what it seems like. And probably even Caiaphas was kind of serving as a pseudo high priest in the shadows, unofficially. His son-in-law, he probably told his son-in-law a lot of times what to do, is kind of what I'm getting at. Is probably why they took Jesus before Annas, before then they ended up taking him to before Caiaphas. John, the writer of the gospel, and a Jewish official both actually refer to Annas as the high priest in these next verses we're going to read. Let's read verses 15 through 18. Simon Peter, another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty there, and then brought Peter in. "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" the girl at the door asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. And so Peter and this unnamed disciple, who do you figure that unnamed disciple was?
John.
Yeah. Most scholars believe that it had to have been John, who never named himself, when he was in any of these accounts that he described. And so Peter and John apparently had followed Jesus and the group that had arrested him from Gethsemane to the residence of the high priest in Jerusalem. And John had some connection with the high priest, I guess. And so he was able to get him and Peter into the courtyard. And Peter's first denial of Jesus happened when the servant girl at the gate, who would let the people in, questioned him and said, you aren't one of his followers, one of this Jesus guy's followers, are you? And of course, Peter denied that he was. And that was his first denial of Jesus. And just by the way, as Peter stood by that fire, Jerusalem is 2,600 feet above sea level. And so in the spring, they can be pretty cold nights. And even the description of it being a cold night and the people there warming themselves by the fire, it's some of those kinds of details that point to an eyewitness testimony, given just little details like that in the story. Let's read verses 19 through 24. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Now, again, this is Annas, but he's referred to as the high priest, even though his son-in-law Caiaphas is actually the recognized high priest. But John refers to him as the high priest. And he questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Verse 19, verse 20. "I have spoken openly to the world," Jesus replied. "I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby struck him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demanded. "Well, if I said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. Tell me, what did I say that was wrong? But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" And then Annas sent him still bound to Caiaphas the high priest. And so Annas questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus obviously had nothing to hide. Like he said, he had taught, we read all these accounts in John. He was teaching out in the public. Like in the temple, he mentioned in synagogues, he stood out and he taught what he said out in public. He wasn't meeting with people behind closed doors and stirring up stuff. He was standing out in public places teaching people where anybody could hear. And so when Annas is asking him about his disciples and his teaching, and Jesus is saying, there's nothing I can tell you that anybody that has been around the temple could tell you what you're asking me. I think in a way Jesus was saying, why are you even asking this? Because you know everything that I've taught. My disciples, you've seen, they've been seen with me. I mean, none of this stuff was secret. But this is the beginning of these trials were a charade. And it's kind of the beginning of this kind of whole hokey process. Well, he got whacked in the face. Jesus got whacked in the face, and he said, what did I do wrong? Testify. Tell me what I did wrong. And of course, nobody said anything or nobody stuck up for him. So still either tied up or in chains, Jesus was sent by Annas to Caiaphas. How far that was, like how far they had to take him from Annas to get to Caiaphas is unknown. It's possible that this complex, this building, it's possible that both Annas and Caiaphas lived in the same building. So it actually may have only been minutes from where they took him, from talking to Annas till they took him before Caiaphas, but we just don't know that much. John didn't actually give us any of the details here about Jesus' appearance before Caiaphas. The synoptic Gospels, which are what? Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The synoptic Gospels indicate that this audience with Caiaphas included an appearance before the Sanhedrin, the council of the Jewish elders. They apparently were especially summoned to Caiaphas for Jesus to be brought before all of them. So verses 25 through 27 then. Now it's back to Peter. As Simon Peter stood warming himself by that fire we talked about, he was asked, "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it again, saying, "I am not." Well, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. "Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?" And again Peter denied it. And at that moment, what? The rooster began to crow. So as Peter stood at that fire, he gets asked for a second time, like, aren't you one of Jesus' followers? And once again, of course, Peter denied it. That was his second denial. And then the third time Peter was asked, he's asked by a relative of the guy whose ear Peter had cut off. That guy's name was what? Malchus. And so this relative of Malchus, when he asked Peter the question about being associated with Jesus, the way it's phrased, especially in the original Greek, he's basically expecting a positive answer. He's expecting Peter to have to acknowledge it. Basically saying, "Look, dude, I saw you in the olive grove that night, didn't I?" Expecting a yes answer. But of course, Peter said no. And again, the Synoptic Gospels tell us that Peter vehemently denied knowing Jesus. One of them even says about Peter calling down curses, when he's just so vehemently denying that he had no association with Jesus, nothing to do with Jesus. No, you didn't see me in that olive grove that night. And yet he was the one that cut this guy's relative's ear off. Well, so just after Peter denied Jesus for the third time, again, the rooster began crowing, and Peter knew that those words that Jesus had just told him just hours before. I mean, it had only been hours before when Jesus told him, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster even crows here in this coming morning. That's in John chapter 13. Well, let's read verses 28 through 32. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas now to the palace of the Roman governor, who would have been who? Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" If he were not a criminal, they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Well then, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. So, again, when we get into these verses here, John doesn't describe the early morning session of the council. Caiaphas had put Jesus on oath, and he had to declare whether or not he was the Son of God. And of course, Jesus said that he was, and then he was charged with what? For claiming to be Son of God. Blasphemy. You can read about that like in Mark 14. And the penalty under Jewish law for blasphemy was death. And And so, because the high priest, though, didn't have the authority to execute a death sentence, we've talked about that before. The Jews were allowed a lot of leeway, but the Romans wouldn't allow them to execute people, although sometimes I think they swept it under the rug. But basically, they weren't allowed to do their own executions, and so therefore they had to transfer the case to the governor, to the Roman governor, to get him to declare that Jesus would be executed. And of course, this Roman governor was Pontius Pilate. Well, the rules of the Jewish religious leaders would declare them to be ceremonially unclean if they did what that we just read here? If they actually went into the palace. The rules, the religious rules of the Jewish religious leaders said that if a Jew went into a Gentile's home or place of business, they would become ceremonially defiled, ceremonially unclean for a week. And so, to avoid making themselves ceremonially unclean, they simply went into the courtyard, and Pilate came out to them. And I say, right off the bat, aren't religious rules great? Okay, so you're in the compound of the Gentiles there. Your rules say I can't go inside the compound, but it's okay if I stand on the porch. I'm not unclean now because I'm just out on the porch, and the Gentiles still there talking to me, but I'm not actually in the house. And so I have to say, people have devised these religious rules over the years. So many different things are so silly. They are not based out of the Bible, and that defilement was not anything out of the Mosaic Law. That was a rabbinical rule. Rule from the Jewish Talmud or the Mishnahs, the rabbinical teachings of the Jews. It was rules that were made up by Jewish religious leaders over the years. But we Christians have, over the years and centuries, made up equally ridiculous and silly rules. And the other thing is, they're worrying about violating their rule and becoming ceremonially unclean, but they're trying to do what? They're trying to kill an innocent man. They're trying to kill Jesus. But they're worried about breaking their rules, but they're there to try to have Jesus killed, put to death. Anyway. Pilate's initial question was normal. He said, okay, what? What was his question? What did he ask him? What are the charges? What we just read in these verses. What's the charges against this guy? Right? And the Jews said what? The religious leaders said what? Yeah, if he wasn't a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him to you. Well, what kind of answer? That didn't answer the question, right? Why didn't they answer the question? Because he hadn't done anything, right? And Pilate sees this right off the bat. He's realizing that they gave him a smart butt answer. Think there a minute. Anyway, I digress. They gave him a smart butt answer because they didn't have a charge that they could really give. They just said he's a criminal, and you need to just deal with him. And Pilate sniffs through that right away and says, he responded, well then go deal with him by your own law. Well, the Jewish religious leaders' next statement made their intentions clear. As we talked about, Roman law didn't allow them to execute somebody, and they wanted Jesus dead. And Pilate, we know he realized that their motives weren't sincere, probably just by the way they were acting. Plus, Matthew 27:18 says that Pilate knew it was out of envy that they had turned Jesus over to him. The Romans, how did the Romans execute non-citizens? How did the Romans execute non-citizens? Crucifixion. And therefore, what this is getting to, the last of these verses in this section I just read to you, it said it was going to fulfill prophecy about what? Okay, a prophecy about how he would die. And so Jesus himself had said that as the bronze serpent in the desert was lifted up, remember back in, where was that? Chapter 5 or so in John, as the bronze serpent was lifted up in the desert, so too what? So too the Son of Man would be lifted up. And that, if you remember from back when we talked about that being lifted up was referencing what? being lifted up on a cross. You've seen the depictions, nailed to the cross, and then they would take ropes or whatever and lift that cross up into the air. He was referring to himself about how he would be lifted up. And so again, that prophecy even of how he was going to die, it wasn't going to be, if the Jews would kill somebody, how would they normally do it? Stoning. But it was said that the Son of Man would be lifted up to die. And so that all ties into this. And I know some of you are like kind of fuzzing on me here, but all this stuff ties together. It really does. The Jewish religious leaders likely believed that when Jesus would die on the cross, that would be a sign to all the Jewish people that he had been judged and cursed by God. That's based on Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 23. That's the one that says about anyone who is hung on a tree is cursed by God type of deal. Some of you remember that scripture. And then since it would demonstrate that he had been cursed by God, it would nullify in the religious leaders' minds, it would nullify in the people's minds Jesus' claims that he was who? Actually, the Messiah, really. The Messiah was the main thing here. Ironically, Jesus' death on the cross became the means of justification apart from the law, as he was cursed for those who believe. He became a curse for us. You can read Galatians 3:13. Because of time, I can't go back and read it. I'm already falling behind here. Let's go to verses 33 through 38. First part of 38. Verse 33. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea," Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you've done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." "Oh, you are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. So at this point, Pilate goes inside. He has Jesus brought to him so that he could interview him privately. He leaves the Jewish religious leaders outside, goes inside. Has Jesus brought in. Luke tells us that the Jewish religious leaders told Pilate that Jesus claimed to be a king. And so Pilate directly asked Jesus if he was the king of the Jews. But Jesus replied by asking Pilate, "Do you think that, is that something that you are thinking because maybe I'm a threat to Rome? Or are you just asking me that because the Jews, have said that to you?" Well, Pilate probably didn't like to have his question answered with another question, and I would paraphrase his response by, "Hey, I'm not a Jew. What do I care about Jewish kings? I'm just trying to figure out what the heck the Jewish leaders are bringing you here for. What did you do? What did you do wrong?" That's how I would paraphrase Pilate's answer back to Jesus. Well, Jesus' description of his kingdom that he gave then, I don't think helped Pilate very much. That's what Jesus explained next about the kingdom that he was from, and it wasn't one of this world and so forth. And I don't think Pilate picked up on that very much. Jesus, of course, was talking about God's heavenly kingdom, but Pilate didn't get it. I don't think he understood anything of any spiritual significance. He wasn't thinking in that vein at all. And so, but because Jesus said he had a kingdom, Pilate jumped on that and said, "Oh, well then you are a king." So he obviously didn't get anything Jesus was saying. Jesus is talking about a spiritual kingdom. Pilate ain't getting any of it. All he heard was, "Yeah, I have a kingdom." And so Pilate says, "So you are a king." Well, Jesus basically said, "Yeah, I am. That's why I came into the world, and to testify to the truth, and those who are devoted to truth will listen to me." And of course, Pilate replied, "What? What is truth?" Again, from the context even, it is, I think, impossible to be sure what Pilate meant or what he thought of Jesus at this point. Was Pilate saying that facetiously? Was he saying, "No, yeah, what is truth?" Or was he saying, "Okay, tell me what is truth?" Or was he, "Yeah, what is truth?" We don't really know There's no way to know for sure what kind of attitude Pilate had when he said what is truth, but what we do know is, ironically, the truth was what? Yeah, the truth was standing right in front of him. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. He was the truth, and he was standing right in front of Pilate, but of course, Pilate didn't know that. Second part of verse 38 through verse 40. With this, then, he, Pilate, went out again to the Jews and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? They shouted back, No, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in a rebellion. And so Pilate clearly declared that Jesus was what? Innocent of any crime. And I don't think Pilate looked upon Jesus as being any threat to the Roman government. But he realized he had a situation here. The synoptic accounts tell us that by this time, a crowd of other Jews had gathered around with the Jewish religious leaders outside of Pilate's residence. And the Jewish religious leaders had made it clear they wanted Jesus dead, even though they knew he wasn't guilty of any crime. So it appears that Pilate came up with a solution that he thought maybe would work for him. Since it was his custom to release a Jewish prisoner at Passover, he offered to release either Barabbas, who was guilty not only of rebellion, but Mark and Luke tell us that he was also guilty of murder, or Jesus. And he thought, surely at least a bunch of these, Jewish lay people out in the crowd will not want to say, well, release a murderer instead of this Jesus guy. But Pilate was quite wrong, and the Jews enthusiastically called for the release of a murderer instead of the release of Jesus. Well, first 3 verses in chapter 19. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him in the face. Roman flogging or scourging was a beating done with a wooden handle. There was a wooden handle with leather thongs, several leather thongs coming out of it. And at the end of the thongs, they would embed pieces of bone or bits of metal, like butterfly-shaped metal. And when they would beat a bare back of a man with that, just a couple of strokes with that thing would start tearing flesh away. And in the most severe beatings, the victim didn't even survive it to get the crucifixion. Luke tells us in chapter 23 that Pilate hoped that if he had Jesus flogged, the Jews would be satisfied at that, and then he could just set him free. The soldiers who flogged Jesus, of course, also slapped him in the face. They mocked him by putting this purple robe on him, and they took some thorns that were growing nearby and kind of wove them into a crown and shoved that down on top of Jesus' head. Verses 4 through 7. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, Here is the man. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify! Crucify! But Pilate answered, You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jews insisted, We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be what? The Son of God. So after Jesus was beaten, Pilate then comes back out to the crowd, tells him again that he was what? That he was innocent. He found no guilt in him. But he has the soldiers bring Jesus out after the beating and shows him to the crowd. Beaten, bloodied, wearing this mocking purple robe and wearing that crown of thorns. And once again, Pilate was wrong in his assumption about what the crowd's reaction would be. As soon as the Jewish religious leaders saw Jesus, they began shouting, Crucify! Crucify! And it seems that Pilate probably was disgusted and with sarcasm, using sarcasm because he knew Roman law wouldn't allow the Jews to do it, but he said, Go crucify him yourself then. Well, the Jewish religious leaders knew Pilate was just jagging them, And they angrily responded that by their law, Jesus was worthy of death for blasphemy because he claimed to be the Son of God. I will say that in that way, yeah, they were right. He said he was the Son of God, but the matter of fact was that what? He really was. So it wasn't blasphemy, but he did make that claim because he really was. Verses 8 through 11. When Pilate heard this, that Jesus had claimed to be the Son of God, he was even more afraid. And he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power to either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." So the Jewish religious leaders were all outraged, because Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. But many people believe that the thing that scared Pilate here, that when they told him that Jesus had claimed to be the Son of God, any ideas about why Pilate kind of got scared about that? The deal, it goes into the Roman Greek culture of that time. They believed that at times the Roman or the Greek gods, the Roman or Greek gods would actually have children, would have come to earth and have children with human men and women, and that those children born out of this consummation between gods and mortals then became semi-divine human beings with some godly kinds of characteristics, also referred to in many of our movies today as what? Demigods. The younger ones know that. The older ones are looking at what movies? What are you talking about? But yeah, they're referred to as demigods. And so many believe that Pilate, when he heard that Jesus referred to himself as the Son of God, many believe he got scared because he's thinking, uh-oh, man, I better, am I going to get the gods all stirred up now? Because, what if this guy is a demigod, And so he goes in and he asks Jesus, what did he ask him first? Where are you from? Meaning, he's thinking what? Maybe where are your origins? Or you happen to be from the heavenly realms with the gods, or something. And of course Jesus what didn't give him an answer. Now some people think that that's just a fulfillment of Isaiah 53:7, where it says he was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Maybe so. Maybe that's the whole deal behind all this. But I think maybe it's possible as well that Jesus didn't. What do you think possibly would have happened if Jesus would have said to him, actually, my origin is heavenly. I came from the heavens originally, and so forth. If he'd have said anything like that, which would have been what? True. If he would have said that, possibly Pilate would have got so scared that, at that point, maybe he'd just let him go. But Jesus didn't want him to just let him go because what? His time had come, right? He had to go to the cross and die. I think the whole trail of this conversation there, I think that seems to me that's what was going on. Jesus didn't want to give him any impression that he was actually from heaven because he didn't want to do anything to scuttle actually his death. And this is another example. You see that in these accounts here today. We've seen it all through John, but Jesus willingly gave himself up. Again, he didn't have to make Pilate kill him, but I think that's one of the big reasons why he didn't answer his question. He didn't want to scare him so that he would actually release him and not have him killed. In any case, Pilate couldn't believe that Jesus refused to answer the question, and he said, don't you know, I got the power to either let you go or have you killed, crucified. And some commentators think like he was getting all hot and mad and stuff. I think he was just puzzled. I don't think he went from being scared to all of a sudden he's, ranting and raving. I think he's just saying, you understand, I could let you go. And Jesus basically told him what? You won't do anything to me unless it's what God is allowing you to do. But of course, again, Pilate didn't understand. He didn't understand any of that. And then lastly, Jesus said, that the ones who had turned him over were guilty of the worst sin, or the one who turned him over was guilty of the worst sin. Most people think that was a reference to Caiaphas, the high priest. It might also refer to all the Jewish religious leaders who were playing a part in it. But most agree for sure that Jesus was referring to Caiaphas for turning him over to Pilate in the first place. Verses 12 and 13, almost done here. From that point on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. But the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. So after this last conversation with Jesus, Pilate was apparently more eager than ever to what? Set him free. Some people think Pilate's conscience was getting the best of him. Some people refer back to Matthew 27:19, where it says Pilate's wife had a bad dream about this innocent man and told Pilate, "Don't have anything to do with him. I've suffered greatly from a dream today about this innocent man." Some people think that, maybe that was weighing on him. Whatever it was, the Jewish religious leaders then played their most powerful card. That what they said here was, in effect, what the Jewish religious leaders said was that he was no friend of, if you let him go, you're no friend of Caesar. It was a veiled threat to say, you let him go, we're going to send word to Rome that you let loose a guy who claims to be a king and who would be a threat to the Roman emperor's kingdom. And that was their trump card. That was their most powerful card that they could play. Tiberius, the reigning emperor, was notoriously suspicious of rivals. And if he got a report like that, he would have at a minimum have ended Pilate's career, and very likely might have even had him executed. So Pilate apparently made his decision right then and there. Neither his nagging conscience or his wife's bad dream or the possibility of offending a Roman god or a Roman or Greek god that he probably had a limited belief in anyway, none of that stuff was going to take precedence over his career, and especially over saving his own skin, saving his own hide, saving his life. He had Jesus brought out to this elevated stone platform where judgments were rendered, and he sat down on what? What does it say in the verse? What did he sit down on? The judge's seat. You know the Greek word that's translated to judge's seat? Some of you do. The bema. The bema seat. And that's the same word that's used in 2 Corinthians 5:10, where it says that all of us who have saving faith in Jesus will one day appear before the bema, the judgment seat of Christ, to be evaluated for both the good and the bad that we did while in the body. It's the believer's judgment. It's not our salvation is secure, but we will lose and gain rewards according to how we did with our salvation. And that's that same Greek word used there, bema. That Pilate sat down at the bema, at the judgment seat, to pass the judgment on Jesus at this point. Verses 14 through 16. I think I already read 14. I'll read it again here. Close with this, 14 through 16. It was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, "Take him away, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. And finally Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. Pilate didn't believe Jesus was the king of the Jews, but he presented him to them basically to rub it in their face a little bit. Just to kind of jag at him, here's your king. He knew that they wouldn't like it. As the Jews continued to call for Jesus' crucifixion, Pilate threw another jab at him. He said, "Shall I crucify your king?" Again, he knew Jesus wasn't their king and that they didn't claim him as king, but he was sticking it in their face at this point. It was this tit for tat thing that was going on because they were pressuring him and causing him to do something he didn't want to do. He's like sticking some stuff back in their face here. But then shockingly, after he said, "Shall I crucify your king?" the chief priest replied what?
"We have no king but Caesar."
we have no king but Caesar. The official leaders of God's chosen people said that they had no king other than the Roman emperor. It was the final step in the process initially described way back in chapter 1 of John, in verse 11, when it said, He, the Logos, the Messiah, the Word, came to that which was His own, the Jewish people, but His own, the Jewish people, did not receive Him. Again, that's John 1:11. It was kind of the final step in all that had occurred between then and at this point. Pilate finally washed his hands of the matter, and he sentenced Jesus to be crucified. And that's where we picked up then at chapter 19 and verses 16 and 17 on Palm Sunday, when we went through the crucifixion. And then we went through chapter 20 on Easter Sunday, the resurrection. And then, if you can still count beyond 20, we have what's left then. Chapter 20, the next one, after the resurrection chapter, the next chapter would be chapter 21. 21 comes after 20. I know. I know you're ready to go here. But next week, if the Lord wills, we will do John chapter 21, and we will close up a journey we started the first Sunday of last September through the book of John. I'm pretty sure that this will break my record in terms of pages of sermon notes. When I did the book of Revelation, which also took around 9 months, I think I had 182 pages of sermon notes. But I'm already at that, and I have another chapter to go yet. So it got so big I stopped bringing it up here because it wanted to fall off the pulpit. But it's a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff in the Gospel of John, and it's been quite a journey. But if the Lord wills, next Sunday we'll finish that up. And as this, I think it's appropriate, as this leads into what we already covered with the crucifixion of Jesus. I want to close singing the song, My Jesus, I Love Thee. If ever I love Thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. Let's sing that as we close, number 70.